white looking. Or, you know, that at least lets us know that it's a thing about mere surface appearance.
In my research, I talk about inscribed race. You know, when I can write about it, I can be more clear, and I talk about, you know, this person has been assigned to this racial classification, which lets the person know it's way over here now, Joe.
Gotcha.
Which lets the person know right away that the racial classification system is a fiction, and that's been forced on you when I say ascribed or assigned. So, but you're right. The way, and this is why I advocate getting rid of racial classifications altogether, because there's no way around it. As long as you maintain these labels, we're going to language it that way. And so it's very hard to try to keep in mind the fictions when we have not come up with, when you cannot come up with an alternative way of talking about it, you know, where you have to use the term. So I say get rid of it and maybe talk about it. And some people say in terms of culture or what have you.
But it's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because
you said, how did I get away? How did I escape that? Well, to be perfectly honest, on the one hand, I would say...
you hit your head, didn't you, when you were young?
On the one hand, I have to say, right up front, I don't think you ever fully escape it, because you're constantly grappling with that pressure. I mean, it took a long time for me to say... openly, and I have to, I guess, practice it, that's not me, you know. I will not be identified that way. But I think you think in the back of your mind, and I'm revealing something, a secret that a lot of people of color would not admit, you're constantly even questioning yourself because it's so ingrained. Am I really just fronting here, you know? Am I really just trying to escape that which I really am? I mean, I'm serious. And so it sounds
Which
crazy.
would mean what? What are the behaviors that you really are?
Well, that authentic blackness that somehow you're trying to pass, you know, that you don't want, what you said in the beginning, perhaps you just don't want to be associated with the black group. And so blacks would say you're just trying to pass because you're trying to... get more opportunities. You're trying to be the house nigger as opposed to the field nigger or something like that. And whites would say you're just not being true. You're just not being authentic, you know, in a different way. You just, you know, you're trying to pass.
But and the whole,
you know, for something that you're not.
Right, and the whole underlying thing here, as you might be able to gather, you the viewer, is that the whole point of imagining race is to put in place certain expectations for people's behavior, what they are meant to think they are. If you grow up thinking you're a doctor and thinking you're the sort who could be a doctor, then you can be. If you're the kind who grows up understanding, oh no, I'm simpler than that, or whatever, and this is what race does, is it sets up, it sets up expectations, and these things, and of course, the simplistic kind of Republican rhetoric now is, well, everybody can just do what they want if they just pull themselves up and just don't think that, or whatever. But we're talking about children. We're talking about you, the viewer, think of yourself as a child. When you're a child, you absorb things. You're not critical. You simply absorb. If you spend the first 7, 8 years of your life simply absorbing, intuitively absorbing what everything around you says you are and are going to be, it's just too much to ask a child. No, don't do that. You know, the child.
One day, you know, you can just escape that.
So it's a vicious circle, and really, in order to break out of it, and it's the same thing with the ghettos that are set up. They say, well, you can just leave the ghetto or whatever, but every wave of children in the ghetto is the same. They're children, and by the time they get to a point where they can even begin to think in an adult-like way or in a way which could start to begin to settle.
You've already been taught.
You've already been destroyed.
Yeah, there's no other possibility. There's no option.
And people say, why didn't your parents get them out?
Yeah.
Well, the parents were children before them in the same place.
Yeah.
So it's a wave of
generational
hopelessness.
Oppression.
Yeah.
You know. So, but to go back to your question about, so I said that on the one hand, I still kind of grapple with that only because you're constantly being bombarded. That's my reality. It's not like, I'm ever free of that.
Well, but the minute you've
hand,
problematized it, though, you become
right. And I would say the reason, this is very important, and it relates to what you were just saying about generational oppression, the reason why I could problematize it, because your audience might be saying, well, how would she, how could she escape it at all if she was completely
physical,
immersed
moved
in
to
it?
a white neighborhood.
It was a combination of things, and that's part of it. One part of it, though, early on, okay, and this is very important because you mentioned, early, the influences on early child development. Early on, a major influence on my development was my mother's family. We were not that close with my dad's family, the so-called African-American side, which is not even totally, see, I'm saying it again, which is also, it turns out.
But that was very jumbled, too, I can tell the viewer, because
that's what I was saying,
because your black side of the family, your father's side of the family considered black, but was a fairly aristocratic family in the sense of being a city family and being having, being at least black aristocracy relatively, not quite, but compared to the Indian side.
And also,
yeah.
my father, it was
the
my
Indian
father,
side farmers.
The Nortons, who were African-American, who were, might be considered unmixed blacks, dark-skinned African-American. They were, we know, also mixed with Native Americans.
No, the Carters were.
No, it's both. And this tells you how complex JoJo's point that we're all
Don't call me JoJo.
Mixed, if you will, possibly. But my father's mother, a Carter, is actually white by virtue of the white master who raped her grandmother, and African, and we know that for a fact. So, and the Carter side is, and there was more mixing with whites because they are very light-skinned. And the only reason why they married Nortons is to escape the stigma of being a apparently mixed race African-American. But
show pride in the blackness. Yeah.
But that's another story. But I was saying we were not very close with that side of the family growing up. We were very close with my mother's side of the family, which is Native American, Piscataway specifically, and white, and who were isolated. They.
Yeah, I want to ask you some more questions.
But I want to get to this point, Joe. You asked me this, and so they were their own. They had their own culture and their own group that was completely, because they were isolated, completely maintained that culture in isolation, untainted, if you will, by outside forces. And they never labeled themselves racially.
Yeah, they did.
They said
not in any They said not in any universally understood way.
It was always stories about.
You know what it reminds me of?
Americans.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of is that some Indian tribes I heard I thought had a great way of referring to themselves, the people. That's what they call themselves.
Yeah.
The people. We're the people.
And
whatever you all are, we don't know.
We sort of people, and so they had their own culture, and they did not label themselves racist.
Oh, I never thought of it as we sort, like we sort of people.
Right.
I thought it more like we sort our own, or we sort ourselves out.
We sort of people.
We sort of people makes more sense.
Code word for this mixed
right,
race.
uncategorizable.
Uncategorizable because you could
Clearly
not.
aren't black or weren't considered black.
Because number one, you weren't going to associate yourself with black.
Wanted to hold themselves above black.
Exactly, and there were some blacks like.
So there must have been a feeling with your mother's coupling with a black fellow that you were ruining the family.
So they would not categorize themselves or associate themselves with blacks, and they could not categorize themselves as Native American because that wasn't even an option. Okay. You could not, back in the day, people don't know this, you only had two options, white or black, and that was it.
No, that's not true. Asian?
No, that was also a later.
Well, way back in the day.
And so, they did not, so they had no name for themselves except for the name they could come up with. And so there was the only culture that we had, we embraced was the Proctor culture, was the we sort culture. And so I never associated myself, because that was a major influence on me and my sisters and my brother, I never labeled myself. And my parents, my mother, never labeled herself. And she never said, you are black. And by that time, they didn't use the term we sort, so she never said we sort, but she would say Proctor or something like that, which was, again, a code word.
Right, and at that time, too, they were starting to come out more openly with the idea that, okay, we're clearly Indian and we can trace it back now, and there's no danger in tracing it back, because if you're talking about the 1800s, you're talking about...
Actually, that, believe it or not, did not take place until the 80s. My grandmother
I'm sure they talked about it, maybe not with you.
No, they talked about it, but it was in indirect ways, because, again, it was not allowed. You could not do that. It was socially sanctioned by whites and by blacks.
Right. It's a very...
Native Americans had no voice.
It's a very interesting situation, because you've got something which could never be spoken about, but at the same time, it's something which in no case was it overlooked.
Right.
In no case would a white person marry one of these proctors who clearly looked not white, and in no case would a proctor marry a black.
Right.
And so you've got a group which is clearly not white, not black, not Asian, and
not Native American.
not able to identify not allowed to identify itself as Native American. So there they are, just the people. They're just people, uncategorizable people.
And so
that could feed into your own ability to feel yourself uncategorizable.
That's what I'm saying. You asked me, how could I problematize it? I'm saying that right, and it's because I did not have a strong sense of a label, from early on. And my parents, most importantly, because there's all these other environmental influences, my primary environmental influence, my parents, my family, did not categorize me. My father didn't even categorize me.
Well, he did when he expected you to date in a certain way.
Yes, not until until the threat became apparent. Threat to his ego.
Which is kind of, a threat to his ego, but not to his race, because he himself married outside of his race.
Not to his race, and that's why I said my father he never labeled us either. He never said, you are black, and this is the culture that, we embrace or something. But it wasn't until we became teenagers and started dating white people, because here's another influence. This is another reason why I could question these things, because I was raised in a predominantly white area. It's actually multicultural, but still predominantly white. And so I tell my classes all the time, it may come as a surprise to you all that categorize me as black, but I'm more culturally white than I am black.
Big Leonard Skinner fan.
In the sense that, that they think of.
I gotta get the phone.
Meanwhile, 5 years earlier.
I don't know.
I had a question for you.
All I know is that
this is a marriage question.
50%.
We've been asking people all day.
Ask me.